My husband took care of the widow next door and looked down on me. I lived for myself. Chapter 1: The Widow's Share. The clatter of machinery hummed in the background as I wiped the sweat from my forehead. Another long day at the factory had passed, my hands aching from the endless repetition of stitching fabric and sorting materials. Yet, despite the exhaustion settling deep in my bones, there was a sense of quiet satisfaction in knowing that my efforts would contribute to our household. Michael and I had worked at this factory together for years, side by side, enduring the grueling conditions with the hope that one day, things would get easier. Every month, we received our wages along with the factory benefits, 3 gold coins, some cotton, and a piece of fabric. It wasn't much, but it was something. Something we had earned. The walk home was brisk, the cold air biting against my skin. The moment I stepped into our small house, I found Michael standing by the wooden table, his back turned to me. I noticed the widow from the Carter family standing at our doorstep, her arms crossed over her chest. My stomach tightened. "Here, take this," Michael said, pressing something into her hands. I stepped closer, my breath catching when I saw what he had given her, our benefits. The 3 gold coins, the fresh cotton, and even the fabric meant for our household. My voice was steady, though my fingers curled into my palm. "Michael, what are you doing?" He turned to face me, his expression blank, as if my presence was nothing more than an inconvenience. "She needs it more than we do." The widow clutched the bundle, her lips pulling into a faint smile. "Thank you, Michael. You're so kind." I felt something bitter rise in my throat. Was it kindness, or was it favoritism? "She has 2 children to raise," Michael continued, as if that justified everything. "She has no husband to provide for her." I inhaled sharply. "And what about us, Michael? Did I work all those hours at the factory just so you could hand over what we earned to someone else?" Michael frowned, his tone laced with condescension. "Don't be so selfish. We're doing fine." A humorless laugh escaped me. "Fine? You don't get to decide that alone." I gestured at the widow, who now seemed uncomfortable with the tension in the air. "If you want to give away your share, that's your choice. But don't make decisions about mine." Michael exhaled, shaking his head. "You don't understand. She's struggling." I clenched my jaw. "We struggle too, Michael. Or have you been too busy playing the hero to notice?" The widow shifted awkwardly, mumbling a quick thanks before hurrying away. Michael watched her go, his expression softening in a way that made my stomach turn. That was the moment it hit me, I was invisible to him. I had stood by his side for years, believing that we were partners in this life, but today, I realized something bitterly painful. Michael didn't see me. Not as his wife. Not as his equal. Not even as someone whose opinion mattered. People would talk. They would whisper about how my husband took care of another woman while disregarding his own wife. And worst of all, I had let it happen. But no more. If Michael wanted to play the noble husband to another woman, he was free to do so. But I wouldn't stand by and watch. I wouldn't be the silent wife anymore. This was the beginning of something new. Something for myself. The factory air was thick with the scent of hot metal and grease, the rhythmic pounding of machines echoing in my ears as I wiped the sweat from my forehead. It was hard work, but I never complained. Michael and I had done this for years, waking before dawn, working ourselves to the bone, and returning home together, exhausted yet content in the knowledge that we were building a future. Or so I thought. Each month, we received the same factory benefits, 3 gold coins, some cotton, and a piece of fabric. A small reward for our relentless labor. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I looked forward to these little earnings, planning how to use them wisely. The coins went into savings, the cotton became warm quilts for the winter, and the fabric? I often dreamed of making new dresses or household items with it. But this time, something was different. I had finished my shift and walked home, expecting to see Michael waiting for me at the dinner table. Instead, I found him outside, standing in front of the widow Carter's house. She was young, her face still bearing the softness of someone who should have been enjoying the best years of her life. But sorrow clung to her like a shadow. Everyone in town knew her story. Her husband had died in an accident, leaving her with 2 small children and no means to support them. Michael had always shown kindness to her, offering to fix things around her house or bringing over extra food. At first, I admired his generosity. But lately, something about it made me uneasy. Tonight, I saw why. I stood frozen as I watched him hand over our earnings, our 3 gold coins, our portion of cotton, our piece of fabric. He placed them in the widow's hands, with a reassuring smile. I felt a dull ache in my chest, a pain that spread as I realized he hadn't consulted me. Not once. Stepping forward, I forced my voice to remain steady. "Michael," I called. He turned, his expression unreadable. "You're home," he said simply. I glanced at the widow, who was now clutching our belongings with wide eyes, as if she too knew this was wrong but dared not refuse. "You gave her our share," I stated, the weight of my words settling between us. Michael let out a sigh, as if I were a child making a fuss over nothing. "She needs it more than we do," he said. I clenched my fists. "That's not your decision to make alone." His brows furrowed, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "It's just some coins and fabric. Are you really that selfish?" Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I had worked just as hard as he had. I had endured the long shifts, the exhaustion, the back-breaking labor. And yet, he had dismissed me without a second thought, as if my efforts were meaningless, as if I had no right to claim what was mine. I swallowed the hurt and straightened my spine. "We could have discussed this." Michael crossed his arms. "Discuss what? That a grieving woman with 2 children needs more help than we do?" He scoffed. "I thought you had a kinder heart than this." I felt my fingers tremble, but I refused to let him see my weakness. "This isn't about kindness, Michael. It's about respect. About being a partner, not an afterthought." For the first time, the widow spoke. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Maybe I shouldn't accept this." "No," Michael interrupted, shaking his head. "It's already decided." Decided. Just like that, as if I were invisible. I looked at my husband, the man I had once believed would always stand beside me. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. A bitter realization settled in my chest. Michael didn't see me as his equal. And worse, he didn't care. I took a step back, the cool evening air brushing against my skin. My hands, once eager to hold on to the life we had built, now felt empty. "Enjoy your dinner," I said quietly before turning away. I didn't look back as I walked home alone. Chapter 2: The Whispers in the Wind. The market was always bustling in the early morning, vendors calling out their prices, women bartering for the freshest produce, and children weaving between stalls with sticky hands and bright laughter. Normally, I moved through it without a second thought, focused only on gathering what we needed for the week. But today, I felt the eyes. It started as a murmur, a barely audible shift in the air. Then the glances came, some subtle, some not. Women huddled together near the fruit stall, lowering their voices as I passed. Men gave me knowing smirks, their expressions laced with amusement or pity. I stopped at the butcher's stall, forcing myself to focus. "A pound of pork, please," I said, handing over the coins. The butcher, a stout man with thick hands and a weathered face, hesitated. "You sure you don't need more, Mrs. Carter? Maybe enough to send over to the widow next door?" Laughter erupted from a nearby group of women. My face burned, but I refused to react. The butcher chuckled. "Just joking. No offense meant." "None meant, but all taken." I grabbed the wrapped pork and turned to leave when I heard another voice, Mrs. Green, the baker's wife. She was speaking in hushed tones to a woman beside her, but her voice was loud enough for me to catch every word. "If my husband ever did that, I'd throw him out." The other woman giggled. "And yet, she just stands there. Imagine your own man looking after another woman like she's his wife while you play the fool." I clenched my teeth, gripping the parcel in my hand so tightly my fingers ached. For the longest time, I had ignored the signs. I had told myself that Michael was just kind-hearted, that his actions were born from generosity, not favoritism. I had defended him even when doubt clawed at the edges of my mind. But now? Now, people were laughing at me. They didn't pity me. They mocked me. And the worst part? I had no answer for them. Because deep down, I was beginning to wonder the same thing: why was I tolerating this? That night, I waited for Michael. Dinner sat untouched on the table, the candlelight flickering as the hours dragged on. The sounds of the town outside had quieted, save for the occasional bark of a stray dog or the distant laughter from the tavern. Finally, the door creaked open. Michael stepped inside, looking surprised to see me still awake. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I studied him. He smelled faintly of ale and smoke, likely from the tavern, though I doubted he'd been drinking much. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his expression unreadable. I took a deep breath. "Where were you?" Michael frowned, setting down the small bundle he'd been carrying. "I stopped by the widow's house." "Of course. And what did you bring her this time?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Emily, not this again. Answer me." Michael hesitated. "Some bread. A few vegetables." I let out a bitter laugh. "So, while our dinner went cold, you were out feeding another woman's family?" His eyes darkened. "She has 2 children, Emily. You don't understand." "No, I do understand," I interrupted, standing. My chair scraped against the floor as I pushed it back. "I understand that my husband has spent more time worrying about another woman's household than his own. I understand that people are whispering, laughing at me because my own husband treats me like an afterthought." Michael's jaw tensed. "So, you care more about what people say than doing the right thing?" "No," I said sharply. "I care that my husband doesn't see me. That you don't even think to ask me how I feel. That you made me the laughingstock of this town without a second thought." His expression flickered, guilt, maybe. Or maybe just frustration that I wasn't blindly agreeing with him this time. "I'm trying to help someone in need, Emily," he said, his voice quieter now. "That's not a crime." "No," I admitted. "But neglecting your wife while you play savior to someone else? That is." A heavy silence settled between us. For the first time, I saw Michael not as my husband, but as a man I no longer recognized. A man who had stopped valuing me long ago. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. I had been waiting for him to see me again, to treat me as his wife, to love me the way he once did. But that day might never come. My fingers curled into fists. "I won't live like this," I said, my voice firm. "Not anymore. Michael's brows furrowed. What does that mean? I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. It means that if you want to take care of another woman so badly, Michael, maybe you should be the one answering to the town's whispers. Not me. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the dim light of our fading home. Chapter 3: A New Resolve. The morning after my confrontation with Michael, I woke up feeling lighter. Not happy, no, that was too strong a word. But lighter. As if a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had begun to lift. For the first time in years, I didn't wait for Michael before starting my day. I didn't set aside a portion of breakfast for him, nor did I check the clock wondering when he would come home. Instead, I took my time getting dressed, braided my hair neatly, and walked out the door with purpose. The town was already awake. Women gathered near the well, exchanging gossip and laughter. Men loaded carts with supplies, preparing for a long day's work. Normally, I would have kept my head down, avoiding the whispers and the knowing glances. But not today. Today, I held my head high. As I passed by the bakery, Mrs. Green, the baker's wife, raised an eyebrow. Well, don't you look different today? I met her gaze without flinching. Maybe because I feel different. She smirked. Finally decided to stop playing the fool, did you? Instead of feeling hurt, I smiled. I finally decided to start living for myself. Mrs. Green studied me for a moment, then nodded approvingly. About time. And just like that, something in me shifted. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't have to endure their pity or their mockery. I had spent too long in Michael's shadow, waiting for his validation, waiting for him to see me. No more. If he wanted to take care of another woman, let him. I would take care of myself. I spent the day at the market, not just buying what I needed, but actually speaking to people. I made conversation with the vendors, asked the seamstress about new fabrics, and even helped an older woman carry a heavy basket to her doorstep. For the first time in a long while, I felt present. Alive. By the time I returned home, I had already made up my mind. Michael was not the center of my world anymore. That evening, he came home late again. His boots dragged against the wooden floor, and he barely spared me a glance before sitting at the table. I assume you already ate, he said, looking at the empty table. I did. He blinked, clearly surprised. You didn't wait for me? No, I met his gaze. I'm done waiting. Michael frowned. Emily. I'm not angry, Michael, I interrupted. I'm just done. His brows furrowed. What are you talking about? I'm talking about us. About how I've spent years putting you first while you put me second. I exhaled. You want to take care of the widow next door? Fine. But I won't sit around being an afterthought anymore. His jaw tensed. You're being dramatic. No, I'm finally being honest. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I'm not your shadow, Michael. I'm not just your wife who stays quiet and endures. I'm a woman with her own life, and from now on, I'm going to live it the way I choose. Michael stared at me, clearly unsettled. Maybe he had always assumed I would endure anything. That I would never push back. But he was wrong. I turned away, leaving him to sit in the silence of his own making. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of freedom I had never felt before. For the first time, I wasn't worried about what Michael would think. I wasn't thinking about whether he would be home for dinner or if he would go to the widow's house again. Instead, I focused on myself. I spent the day visiting an old friend, one I had lost touch with because I had been too busy worrying about my husband's actions. I started planning what I could do with my sewing skills, realizing that I could make my own money instead of depending on Michael's wages. I was no longer a wife living in the shadow of her husband's choices. I was me. And that was enough. Chapter 3: The Breaking Point. Michael had always been predictable. He would come home late, sit at the table expecting dinner, and if I wasn't there, he wouldn't ask questions. He had taken my quiet endurance for granted for so long that when I finally stopped playing my part, it unsettled him. At first, he didn't say much. He just watched me, confused and irritated. But then, his patience wore thin. One evening, I came home from the market later than usual. I had spent the day visiting Mrs. Green at the bakery, learning how to knead dough properly. It had been a good day, one of the best I'd had in years. The moment I stepped inside, I could tell something was wrong. Michael was sitting at the table, his arms crossed over his chest, jaw tight with frustration. His eyes snapped to mine the second I entered. "Where were you?" I set my basket down calmly. "At the market." "4 hours?" I raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you care?" Michael's nostrils flared. "Since my wife started running around town, acting like she doesn't have a home to take care of." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "A home? You mean the one you ignore unless you need something? The one where I sit alone every night while you're at the widow's house?" His expression darkened. "I provide for this household. And I work just as hard," I shot back. "Or have you forgotten that I earn the same wages as you? I get the same factory benefits, but you decided my share wasn't mine to keep." Michael slammed his fist against the table, making the dishes rattle. "You don't understand, Emily. She's struggling. She has 2 children to feed." I clenched my hands into fists. "And I was your wife, Michael. But that never seemed to matter to you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with unspoken resentment, years of neglect finally surfacing. Then, he scoffed. "You're just bitter. You're jealous of her, aren't you?" I felt something inside me snap. "I'm not jealous of her, Michael. I pity her. Because if she thinks you truly care about her, she'll soon learn what I did. You only pretend to care about people when it makes you look good." His face twisted in anger. "That's not true. Then why have you never looked at me with the same kindness you show her?" He had no answer. For the first time, Michael was speechless. And that's when I knew. I had spent too many years waiting for him to be the man I thought he was. The boy I fell in love with had been nothing more than an illusion, and I had clung to it for far too long. I took a deep breath, feeling a calm resolve settle over me. "I'm leaving, Michael." His eyes widened. "What?" "I'm leaving." My voice was steady, firm. I refuse to spend another day in a marriage where I am nothing more than an afterthought. Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're not going anywhere." I met his glare with unwavering determination. "Watch me." He took a step forward, but I didn't flinch. I had been afraid of losing him for years, but now I wasn't afraid anymore. Michael could throw all the anger, all the insults he wanted. But it didn't matter, because I was already gone. Chapter 4: A New Beginning, An Unwanted Past. The first morning I woke up alone, I expected to feel regret. I thought I'd be overwhelmed by doubt, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But as I stretched my arms and felt the quiet stillness of my own space, a different emotion filled me: relief. I had left Michael. I had finally walked away from the man who had treated me as an afterthought, and for the first time in years, my life felt like my own again. Building a life of my own. At first, survival was my only concern. I needed a roof over my head, food on my table, and a way to support myself without relying on the factory. The wages there had always been decent, but I wanted more than just enough to scrape by. Mrs. Green, the kind woman who ran the bakery, welcomed me with open arms. She had always liked me, and when she heard I had left Michael, she didn't ask questions, she just handed me an apron. "Work hard, and this job is yours for as long as you need," she had said. So I did. I woke before sunrise to help knead dough, learning the art of baking from the ground up. I stood behind the counter, greeting customers with a smile I hadn't worn in years. And slowly, my world expanded beyond the factory, beyond Michael's shadow. For the first time, I started forming relationships that weren't tied to my past. The townspeople, the ones who had whispered behind my back, now saw me as someone new. And then, there was Henry. Henry was a carpenter who had a shop down the road from the bakery. He came in every morning for fresh bread, always with a kind smile and an easy manner. At first, I thought nothing of it. But then, he started lingering, making conversation, asking about my day. And I found myself smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in so long. The return of Michael. I had begun to think that maybe, just maybe, my past was behind me. That Michael had accepted my departure and moved on. But I was wrong. It happened one evening when I was locking up the bakery. The street was quiet, most of the town already settling in for the night. I turned to leave, only to stop short at the sight of a familiar figure standing in the dim glow of the street lamp. Michael. I stiffened. "What are you doing here?" He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I came to take you home." I let out a dry laugh. "Home? I don't have a home with you anymore, Michael." His jaw clenched. "Emily, don't do this. You left in a fit of anger, but you and I both know you don't belong here." Something inside me burned at his words. He still didn't understand. He still thought I was the same woman who had spent years waiting for his approval. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze head-on. "You're wrong. I do belong here. For the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere. And it has nothing to do with you." Michael's face darkened. "So what? You think you can just start over? You think people actually respect you now?" His voice dripped with scorn. "You're nothing without me, Emily. A woman who left her husband? The whole town will turn on you eventually." I inhaled deeply, refusing to let his words shake me. "I'd rather be nothing on my own than be nothing with you." His hands curled into fists. "You're making a mistake." "No, Michael." I stepped back, putting distance between us. "The only mistake I ever made was staying with you for so long." His eyes flickered with something, anger, disbelief, maybe even regret, but I didn't wait to see what he would say next. I turned my back on him and walked away. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I had chosen my future. And Michael had no place in it. For weeks after Michael's unexpected visit, I braced myself for another confrontation. I knew he wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat easily. He had spent our entire marriage controlling me, diminishing me, making me believe I was nothing without him. But now? Now, I was thriving. Working at the bakery had not only given me a purpose, but had also introduced me to new friendships, ones that weren't built on pity or obligation. Most surprisingly, my bond with Henry had grown stronger. At first, I had been hesitant. I wasn't ready to open my heart again. But Henry never pushed. He simply existed beside me, offering quiet support, laughter, and a presence that made me feel safe. And for the first time in years, I felt truly happy. But Michael wasn't done with me yet. Michael's last attempt at control. One morning, as I was preparing fresh loaves of bread in the bakery, a hushed murmur swept through town. People gathered in small clusters outside, whispering in excitement. I wiped my hands on my apron and peeked out the window. My heart clenched when I saw Michael, standing in the middle of the square, his face twisted in anger as he shouted at Henry. I threw my apron aside and rushed outside. "Henry!" I called, my voice laced with worry. I pushed through the growing crowd until I stood beside him. Michael's eyes snapped to mine, and I saw pure fury in them. "Emily, you think this man can replace me?" He scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A baker's assistant and a carpenter? What a pathetic life you've chosen." The crowd gasped, but Henry remained calm. He crossed his arms, his face unreadable. I, however, refused to stay silent. "A pathetic life?" I echoed, my voice strong. "You mean a life where I am respected? A life where I am valued? A life where I don't have to beg for love?" Michael's expression faltered for a split second before he regained his arrogance. "You are nothing without me, Emily," he spat. "That's why I took care of you. That's why I took care of me?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You took care of the widow next door more than you ever cared for me. You humiliated me, belittled me, and still expect me to come crawling back?" Gasps filled the air. Townspeople whispered among themselves. Many of them had pitied me for years, but now they saw the truth. A voice cut through the murmurs. It was Mrs. Green, the bakery owner. "Michael Carter," she said, her arms crossed, "you are a disgrace to this town. Everyone has watched Emily struggle under your thumb for years. And now that she's free, you dare to humiliate her in public?" More voices rose in agreement. A man from the factory, where Michael still worked, stepped forward. "No wonder your boss has been questioning your work ethic. You spend more time chasing after a woman who doesn't want you than actually doing your job." Michael's face turned red. Another voice. "I heard the factory is considering a replacement for him," a woman whispered loudly enough for all to hear. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Michael turned in circles, his fury rising as he realized he had lost. He had come here to humiliate me, but instead, he was the one being ridiculed. His downfall was complete. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You'll regret this, Emily." I met his glare without fear. "No, Michael. The only regret I have is not leaving you sooner." With his pride in tatters and his reputation ruined, Michael did the only thing he could do, he fled. By nightfall, word spread that he had resigned from his job and booked a ticket out of the country. And just like that, the chapter of Michael Carter in my life was finally closed. Moving forward. That evening, Henry and I sat outside the bakery, watching the stars. "You are incredible today," he said softly, his fingers brushing against mine. I exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift from my chest. For the first time in my life, I feel free. He turned to me, his gaze warm. "So what happens now?" I smiled, feeling hope bloom within me. Now, I finally start living. Final chapter, a life of my own. Months passed, and the town moved on from Michael's disgrace. The whispers about my failed marriage faded, replaced by admiration for the woman I had become. I no longer carried the weight of someone else's expectations. I had built a life where I was respected, valued, and, most importantly, happy. The bakery had become more than just a place of work, it was a second home. Mrs. Green, who had once been my employer, had now become a dear friend. But what surprised me the most was Henry. A love that grew slowly. At first, I had been cautious. After everything I had endured, love wasn't something I was eager to embrace again. But Henry never rushed me. He never pressured or demanded. He simply stood beside me, patiently waiting for me to realize that not all love was built on suffering. One evening, as we walked along the riverbank, he finally spoke the words I knew had been in his heart for a long time. "Emily," he said, his voice steady, "I know you've been hurt before. And I know you don't need a man to complete you. But if you ever find room in your heart for love again, I want to be the one who stands beside you." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from the overwhelming realization that I had been given a second chance, not just at love, but at life. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Henry, you already are. Happily ever after, on my terms." A year later, I stood in front of a small crowd in the town square. There was no grand wedding, no extravagant celebration. Just the people who mattered, my friends, Mrs. Green, and Henry's family. As I looked into Henry's eyes, I realized that I wasn't just marrying a man, I was marrying a new beginning. This time, I wasn't a woman clinging to a marriage that suffocated me. I wasn't the wife of a man who belittled me. I was Emily. A woman who had learned to stand on her own. A woman who had chosen herself first. And in choosing myself, I had found someone who chose me for exactly who I was. As we exchanged vows, I felt nothing but peace. Because this time, love wasn't something that chained me. It was something that set me free. The end.